So, as I mentioned at the start of this morning, we are continuing our faith story series, looking at how the Bible itself is somewhat like a large collection of faith stories, of lives of people just like you and me, normal people with normal lives. And we're going to look at their faith stories, what happened to them, the encounters they had with God, what happened in their lives, and what can we learn from that? Because like I say, they're people just like you and me. We can learn from their lives about what it means to go through difficult times, what it means to be, like last week, David was looking at Abraham and being called from somewhere and called to something else. Or a couple of weeks ago, looking at the life of Noah and what it's like spending that long period of time on a dark ark is how David referred to it. And this morning, continuing very well on from last week, I'm looking at the story of Sarah. And I've called this patient persistence. And hopefully that will be a bit more clear over the next sort of 20 minutes or so as I explain what I mean by patient persistence. So we're going to jump straight into the story this morning. And Sarah's story is spread for a whole few chapters of the very early part of the Bible still. We're still in the early chapters of Genesis. And we're going to look at Sarah's story. And it jumps across a few different chapters. But especially we're going to be looking at chapters 17 and 18 this morning. So if you've got a Bible with you, if you've got a good old-fashioned hard copy Bible with you, then open that up to the first few pages of Genesis chapter 17. We're going to start there and we're going to work our way through. Or if you've got a phone with you or whatever, then open that up, load up your Bible app or whatever you use. And I promise we won't assume that you're just texting and ignoring everything that we're going to say. But Genesis chapter 17, and we pick it up in verse 15, and I'm going to put it on the screen as well, but it's a little bit small. So if you've got a thing in front of you, I recommend loading that up. Genesis chapter 17, verse 15. God also said to Abraham, "As for Sarai, your wife," now this is important to note that their names weren't Abraham and Sarah to start off with. That comes from the covenant and relationship God creates with them, and their names are changed to Abraham from Abraham to Sarah from Sarai. So Sarai is Sarah, in case you were wondering. "As for Sarai, your wife, you are no longer to call her Sarai." See, here we go. "Her name will be Sarah. I will bless her and will surely give you a son by her. I will bless her so that she will be the mother of nations. Kings of people will come from her." What a responsibility, hey? Abraham fell face down. He laughed and said to himself, "Will a son be born to a man of 100 years old? Will Sarah bear a child at the age of 90? And Abraham said to God, "If only Ishmael might live under your blessing." Then God said, "Yes, but your wife Sarah will bear you a son, and you will call him Isaac. I will establish my covenant with him as an everlasting covenant for his descendants after him." So that's the first part of our story. And we're going to flick through. Maybe it's on the same page for me. Maybe you, it's turn over a page. Chapter 18, verse 9. So time goes on a little bit, and they're met by three visitors. And we pick this up in verse 9 of chapter 18. These visitors say to him, "Where is your wife Sarah?" "There, in the tent," he said. Then one of them said, "I will surely return to you about this time next year, and Sarah, your wife, will have a son." Now Sarah was listening at the entrance of the tent, which was behind him. Abraham and Sarah were already very old. Remember, we've seen that in the last one. Abraham's 100 and Sarah's 90 at this point. And Sarah was past the age of childbearing. So Sarah laughed to herself as she thought, "After I am worn out and my Lord is old, will I now have this pleasure?" Then the Lord said to Abraham, "Why did Sarah laugh and say, 'Will I really have a child now that I am old?' Is anything too hard for the Lord? I will return to you at the appointed time next year, and Sarah will have a son." Sarah was afraid, so she lied and said, "I did not laugh." But he said, "Yes, you did laugh." Nothing gets past God, does it? So I wonder for you, when was the last time you had to wait for something? Whatever it might be. Maybe, I've got a few examples here of some things that maybe you've had to wait for. Maybe, a bit like me this week, you found yourself sat at temporary traffic lights at roadworks, waiting for the green light, which I've spent many minutes of my life this week waiting at. Or maybe it's your birthday. Maybe your birthday's coming up and you're waiting in excitement and anticipation of your birthday. Or maybe we've just recently, a few months ago, we've celebrated Christmas and all the build-up that goes along with Christmas. The excitement, the waiting, the anticipation of what's to come. Maybe you've experienced I will call it a joy of moving house. And the endless waiting and phone calls and emails that go along with that process of moving house. And it feels like it's going nowhere. And then suddenly it's like, boom, it all just clicks into gear. Maybe you've experienced the frustration of waiting for a page to load on your phone or on your laptop. Maybe your phone or your laptop's getting a bit slow, it needs updating. So you're trying to load something, it's taking forever. That little ring goes round and round and round. Or you're trying to watch a video or trying to watch some Netflix, and it's buffering, it just goes on and on and on. Who here remembers dial-up? Yeah? Yeah, there we go. Good old dial-up. The young people aren't in the room now. This would have been really, gone well over their heads, wouldn't it? But I remember being a kid, and you had to wait for your mum to finish getting off the phone with the grandparents so that you could get on the computer, the one and only computer that was about this big in your house, and so that you could get on it and do your school homework. I mean, there's worse excuses for, I couldn't do my homework because mum was on the computer. It's not quite my dog ate my homework, is it? But our lives are so busy now. They're so fast. We're not really good at waiting anymore. Or at least maybe it's just me, I don't know. But I'm not a very good person when it comes to waiting. Case in point with my experience sitting at traffic lights this week. We're hardwired now for instant answers. We want to get things quickly. We can Google any question now, can't we? We can just pull our phone out of our pocket and Google a question. We don't have to try and look for a dictionary for how to spell something or an answer. We instant answers. We've got Netflix and all those things. Everything's just like box set after box set now. You don't have to wait for the next episode of a TV show anymore. You can just binge watch a whole series at a time. Or, we can go on Amazon and I can get something that I need ordered the next day. Or if you're really lucky, the same day. We are so accustomed now to instant fixes and instant answers. We're not very good at waiting anymore. We live a very fast-paced life and a very instant kind of life. Which doesn't really help, especially in life when big things come our way that require us to wait. So maybe as I asked that question, you weren't thinking of trivial things like sitting at traffic lights. Maybe you were thinking of waiting to get test results back and the agony and fear and anxiety that comes with waiting for that phone call from the doctor to give you your test results. Or maybe you are desperately waiting for that operation that you know that you need, and it is endless, waiting and waiting. Maybe you're waiting still on a prayer to be answered, and it feels a bit like, God, I am asking this, but you seem silent. I don't know where you are right now. I need this, Lord. I am at my wit's end. In Sarah's case, we see that she has waited her whole life to the age of 90 to have a child. Waited her whole life until now, until this moment. God says, you're going to have a son. So I want us to picture the scene a little bit this morning. I want us to kind of dig into this story, get ourselves in their shoes, as it were. And I want us to set the scene, kind of try and work out what was it like to be Abraham and Sarah, especially Sarah, in that moment. So what do we see? Well, we see there's a time when God's made this covenant with Abraham and Sarah. He's changed their names. He's given them a new identity as God's people. And he said, you're going to have descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky. And he says to Sarah, you are going to have a son. And I picture her and Abraham at that moment going, oh my gosh, we've been waiting for this our whole lives. You're 100 years old by now. I'm 90. I'm going to have a son. So, I can imagine them right, drop everything you're doing. We're going to B&Q. We're going to pick out some paint. Get the nursery decorated, and they put all the different colours of paint on the wall, and after the 10th one and a few arguments, they finally choose a colour. And then they paint the nursery, and they're ready. Now they just got to wait for the baby to come. But then the years go by, and no baby, no son. And they start to lose that hope that they had. They start to think, I've been here before. I've done 90 years of this. And they start to think, did God get it wrong? Did we not hear God correctly? Did I do something wrong? And they start to doubt God's promise that he made to them. And eventually they come to this point of thinking, maybe God needs my help. That's what it is. Maybe God needs me to step in and help out in this situation. Maybe that's what he's asking for us to do. He's not just going to do it. He's asking for us to do something. He needs our help. So Sarah chats to Abraham and she says, look, Abe, you are not getting any younger. You are 100. And I'm not getting any younger either. I'm 90. And they feel like time is running out on them. So they go to the next best solution that they can think of. A tried and tested practice in their culture at the time. We've got Hagar, the slave girl. We'll use Hagar. It was a common practice at the time that if a wife was not able to have a child, then they would give the slave girl to the husband and that she would have a son, and then they could adopt the son as their own that way. But that doesn't work out to be the happy family situation that Sarah was hoping for either. Just when they've given up all hope, I dread to imagine what their conversations around the dinner table would be. Probably wasn't talking about Ishmael or what happened there. We won't go there. They just get on with their dinner and go on with their lives. But when they've lost all hope, God pays them a visit again in the form of these 3 visitors. And says, this time next year, you're going to have a son. I wonder, put yourselves in Sarah's shoes in that moment. How would you respond to those 3 visitors who come and say, like, I know this seems a bit silly. You've been waiting a long time for this. You're going to have a son. This time next year, they now give them a time stamp. It's like, this time next year, you're going to have a son. I don't know what your response would be, but I imagine mine would probably be quite similar to theirs. They just burst out laughing. They laugh at the impossibility of this situation, the ridiculousness of how this sounds. I can imagine their response would be like, yeah, good one. You know he's 100, right? I'm 90. It's not going to happen. Like, are you joking? They laugh because of the mixture between how impossible this situation is, but also the slim possibility of, but what if it actually does happen? What are we going to do? I'm 90. You're 100. How are we going to have a baby? It's the unfiltered humanity in their response in that moment. That's the beautiful thing of these stories, is they are real. They don't sugarcoat things. We see the full unfilteredness of it. I wonder if you've ever experienced something like that before. Something seems so bonkers to happen. Like the mixture between it's so bonkers, this is ridiculous, but God is saying this could happen, so maybe it could. Then what? They laugh because in the hopelessness of their situation, they've given up all hope. This seems ridiculous. This seems a bonkers thing to happen. Another word you might use for it, and people would have described it like this, is it's an impossible situation. Everything around them points to the fact that this is impossible. This is never going to happen. I imagine being in their shoes and thinking, God, I want to believe you. I really do. But please, I don't want to get my hopes up just for them to be dashed again. I can't deal with that. Or everyone around us is saying, this is impossible. The science says this is impossible. It's not going to happen. I'm 90 years old. He's 100. And they might have been thinking, well, it's not like we haven't tried. I'm 90 years old. I've been trying. And I love the way that God responds to them. Very simple little sentence. I wonder if you noticed it. He just says, is anything too hard for the Lord? As if to sort of say, do you not trust me yet? Look where I've brought you from. Look what I've brought you to. If I say it's going to happen, it's going to happen. Trust me. Trust me. Have some trust, please. I've got you. This is going to happen. So what happens? Well, we go forward a year. And if you want to pick this up with us again, so go forward a couple of pages in your Bible, we pick the story up in chapter 21. Everybody loves a good news story and a happy ending. And here we go, chapter 21, verse 5. Abraham was 100 years old when his son Isaac was born to him. Sarah said, God has brought me laughter, and everyone who hears about this will laugh with me. And she added, who would have said to Abraham that Sarah would nurse children? Yet I have borne him a son in his old age. So they have Isaac. And then we know how the story continues, but we're going to leave that for future mornings. So their names are not the only thing that God is changing in their lives in this story. We see that their minds are being changed. The way that they see the world is being changed. God's trying to say, look, see things from my perspective. He's changing their faith in him. I'm a mountain-moving kind of God. I can do impossible things. Have some more faith. He's changing their attitude to how they trust God with their lives. Trusting impossible situations to him. He changes the way that they define that word impossible. Because this is an impossible situation that with God has been made possible. This is a theme that we see that runs throughout the entirety of the Bible. That God is in the business of making impossible situations possible. I want to flick to a few different things that we see, and we're flicking to the New Testament now, and who better to look at than the life and person of Jesus himself. So in Matthew chapter 19, Jesus says these words. He says, he's being asked a question, and he responds to them. He says, you're right, with man, this situation is impossible. But with God, all things are possible. Impossible situations are possible with God. Or again, a little bit later in Jesus' story, he's in the Garden of Gethsemane. As we get closer to Easter, we're going to look more and more at that. But he prays one of maybe the most dangerous prayers you could ever pray. He says, Abba, Father, all things are possible. There's that word again, possible for you. And then if we know the story, he goes on to say, take this cup from me. And then he finishes it with the most dangerous words you could pray. Yet not my will be done, but your will be done. So what about us this morning? We've dug into this story. We've tried to put ourselves in the shoes of Sarah. What about us this morning? What nugget of wisdom can we take from this story that is going to help us in our relationship with God as we go from here today, as we go into our Mondays and the rest of our week, as we leave here and go into maybe your own what seems an impossible situation? I was listening to a podcast earlier this week that was talking around this idea of prayer, and especially about unanswered prayer and what do we do when God seems silent. And she quoted this phrase. She said, if God's answer is yes, he's increasing our faith. If his answer is wait, he's increasing our patience. If God's answer is no, he's got something better. And it's that middle line that I want us to really focus on as we look at this morning. That middle line of if God's answer is wait, then he's increasing our patience. Patient persistence. It reminded me of something that many years ago we in our old home group did the prayer course by a guy called Pete Gregg, if you know him, from 24/7 Prayer, big on prayer, and he's written a book that I really recommend, God on Mute. One of the best books I've read on prayer, especially when God seems silent. And in that prayer course, he describes our prayers can be a little bit like a traffic light system. So you have a green light, and it's the answered prayer pretty instantly. It's a yes from God, increasing our faith. Or maybe it's an amber light. It's the wait. It's the trust. It's keep praying. Or maybe it's the red. It's the no. I've got something else. I've got something better. And it's that amber light that I think that Sarah's story we can learn from. The amber light of wait. This time next year, she had to wait a whole year after 90 years. Wait one more year. Wait. This time next year. If we're honest, it's not something we're good at, is it? We don't do waiting very well, or at least I know I don't. I'm not very good, especially at traffic lights. When I'm in the car, I'm probably the worst person I can be. To take the analogy a little bit further, have you ever been at a traffic light and you've seen the people that kind of creep in their cars further forward when it's on like a red light? As if I get close, if I go over the line, maybe it will go green. I could do something about this. It's that kind of, we're quick to lose our patience and maybe say, maybe God needs my help. Maybe if I get going, then the light will go green and we'll all get moving. If you haven't seen that, then maybe, like me, you're probably the person doing it rather than actually the person seeing it out of the window. But instead, I think maybe we need to carry this analogy a little bit further. Maybe we need, at times in our lives, to move over out of the driver's seat, sit in the passenger seat, and wait, and let God take the driving seat. Again, there's no better place to look for answers in life than the person of Jesus. And he said, on top of all the great things that he says these words, ask and it will be given to you. Seek and you will find. Knock and the door will be opened to you. For everyone who asks receives. The one who seeks finds. And to the one who knocks the door will be opened. And an interesting thing about this passage, if we're not careful, we could maybe miss it in our reading of it, in our interpretation of it. But it's written in something called the present active imperative. Very fancy, isn't it? I didn't come up with that. I heard it somewhere else, and I'm going to claim it. But basically it's a fancy way, I Googled it as well, it's a fancy way of saying it's a command that is intended to be carried out more than once. So maybe the way that we read this passage shouldn't be ask, seek, knock, but it's ask and keep on asking. Seek and keep on seeking. Knock and keep on knocking. We don't need to try and rush God's plans. We don't need to creep over the line. We don't need to say, maybe God needs my help. What God needs is for us to have patient persistence, not giving up. Keep on asking, keep on seeking, keep on knocking. Don't give up and turn what is an amber light into a red light and say, well, I prayed for it once, it hasn't happened, it must be a red light from God. It might be that it's an amber light and we just need to wait. Don't lose hope when it seems like God is silent. Again, I really recommend this book to you, God on Me. I want to just read a quote from it that maybe some of us here this morning will find helpful. He says this, there's an old Hebrew saying that makes a similar point. God is not a kindly old uncle. He is an earthquake. The best news possible when we are struggling with unanswered prayer. For while there is comfort for the present in receiving God's fatherly love, there is also irresistible hope for the future that is implicit in his omnipotence. An earthquake can shift things that a kindly old uncle can only smile at. Maybe some of us here this morning need to be reminded of the hope that we believe in a mountain-moving God. But also there is going to be times in our lives when we need the presence of God and his peace in our patient persistence and waiting. And I'm aware for many of us this morning, this may be a real live issue for you. You may be sitting there this morning, and this is not a story, this is real life. You are living through what feels like a really impossible situation. The science says this is impossible. Everyone around you is saying, how are you still going? This is an impossible situation. It feels hopeless. You may be sitting there and thinking, James, you just do not understand. This is all well and good, but my situation is worse. My situation is bigger than that. It's bigger than any mountain that can be moved. And you may be right. Maybe I don't understand. But I'm sure for all of us, we all have times in our lives when we go through stuff. Those of you who know my situation and my wife's situation as well, you know that we've been through our fair share of tricky times. And that's not to belittle yours, and it's not to say I know what you're going through. But it's to say that we do go through them, and I've been through some myself. I pray nobody else would go through what we've been through. This is not easy stuff that we are talking about. This is heavy, weighty things that we're talking about. And I guess I'm just saying that to say that I know that it's not easy. I'm not trying to trivialize maybe what's going on in your life. And if that is you this morning, if you are dealing with an impossible situation this morning, I want to encourage you not to go through that impossible situation on your own. The beauty of being church is that we are people to be together with. We're a community to go through that with each other. So if you're here this morning and that's you, I encourage you to find a trusted person and say, look, would you go through this with me? Would you help me in this? Would you pray with me in this? Or maybe in those times when I cannot pray for this myself because I am so tired, would you pray for me? Maybe that's an encouragement for you this morning. Find that person or those people. Maybe it's your small group. Maybe it's a place where you can do this together. The challenge is, folks, we're not promised a life without trouble. I'm sorry to break that to you if that's the first time you're hearing that. But what we are promised is the love and the presence of God, our Abba Father, as Jesus says, in the middle of those troubles. So what about us this morning as I wrap this thing up? Hopefully I haven't just thoroughly depressed you all. Hopefully there's something in here this morning that you can take away as an encouragement. And if you want somebody to pray with at the end, then find somebody. I'm happy for you to come and chat to me, whatever it may be. But maybe this morning we need to change our attitude to how we trust God. Maybe we need to see things from his perspective again, that he is a mountain mover. Maybe we need more patient persistence. I think that only comes with God's help. I think all of this that we're talking about can only come with the help of God in the middle of our situations. And maybe for some of us this morning, with God's help, we need to change the way that we view the word impossible. I want to finish by reading something for us. This is a little devotional book that I love. It's called Jesus Calling. I don't know if you've heard of it before, but it's a beautiful little book, a devotion for every single day. And it's like it's written from Jesus himself directly to you. And I'd love to read this for you. And then once we do that, I'm going to pray and we're going to do communion together. We're going to share communion, this family meal together. But I want to read these words for us that hopefully maybe wrap this thing up quite nicely. That hopefully maybe there's something in here that gives you a nugget to take away, to hold you as you go into your life this week. I am with you. These 4 words are like a safety net, protecting you from falling into despair. Because you are human, you will always have ups and downs in your life experience. But the promise of my presence limits how far down you can go. Sometimes you may feel as if you are in a free fall when people or things you counted on let you down. Yet as soon as you remember that I am with you, your perspective changes radically. Instead of bemoaning your circumstances, You can look to me for help. You recall that not only am I with you, but I am holding you by your right hand. I guide you with my counsel. And afterwards, I will take you into glory. This is exactly the perspective you need, the reassurance of my presence and the glorious hope of heaven. Heavenly Father, as we go from here today, may we know your presence and the glorious hope of heaven going with us into our lives, our Monday, our week, our own impossible situations. Thank you, Lord, that you are present with us every single moment of our lives. You never leave us, never forsake us. And if our God is for us, who can be against us? Lord, your word is full of promises to us of who you are. Help us in our waiting, in our impossible situations, to have patient persistence, to trust you, that you are in control.